Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Craft of the Draft podcast. We've got through another week of Talent League. Jonty, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Very good. Very much looking forward to dissecting this round. Obviously, we see the Vic Metro girls for the first time, so that was probably the highlight of the weekend. But yeah, got to see plenty of footy, so it was a good weekend.
Was a good weekend. Probably should have said it at the start, but I'm one of your co-hosts again, Nathan Seppi, with Jonty, Ralph Smith, other co-host. But this week we did have round 2 of the boys' competition play out and round 3 of the girls, so it's going to be a bit awkward during the year when they might be a week ahead. One might be a week ahead of the other, but some competitive games. We're starting to get a good idea of which teams are going to do well, which teams will probably come out of their shell eventually, but we're seeing glimpses. But it's been a very good start. But we're going to start like last week with the girls' competition. Jonty, you were at a bit more of the girls' footy this week, and the first game was at Highgate. You saw 3 games, but the first of those triple header games was Calder and Sandy. Calder got over the line 4-7-31 to Sandy 3-3-21. Jonty, tell me a bit more about what you saw from those teams. It was the first time we've seen both of them. Daisy Flocker, Meg Webster for Sandy played well. Amy Gaylord, tell me about her, how she performed for Calder and the others that stood out on that day.
Yeah, I think overall there was a belief that Calder was going to get the job done coming into the day. I know we've spoken about the fact that we think they're a strong team, Nathan, this season, and certainly got some really good assistant coaches helping out. Ross Smith, who's the most experienced senior coach in the Talent League. And yeah, they did look like they were a class above or half a class above all day, and then they were able to pull away in the last quarter. But yeah, you bring up Amy Gaylor. She's one that's obviously in Vic Metro, and she cracked in. Probably wasn't her best game, but a good sort of starting block for her to then launch off for the rest of the season. It wasn't a good day for anyone to really show their skill set. It was quite a soggy day. Daisy Flockhart, you say, for Sandy was the standout. She certainly was. She was by a fair way as well. Her strength through traffic and her second efforts and some things that she's able to do with the ball in hand, her fundamentals were really impressive. She racked up plenty of it. And probably if you were to look at Sandy, a couple of other Sandy players that did well, Ash Van Rooyen has a good turn of pace that she was able to show. Jazz Shepherd played well, and I think you could also probably single out the speed of Ash Van Rooyen, like I said, but then also off halfback Meg Webster and what she sort of provided rebounding. So that were the games from Sandy that I liked. Amy Trindade, for me, was the standout from a Calder perspective. She started on a wing, got injured, went forward, and always remained in the contest. She's the sort of player who didn't maybe rack up as much of the ball as some others, or certainly going forward, she doesn't need to rack up as much of the ball, but just with what she does when she does rack it up, really good, really impressive, and a great start for her. She kicked the last 2 goals of the game, which ultimately was decisive in the result. As was Emily Marino. I thought she stood up late as well. So they were the main players to come out of that game, albeit a very difficult day for both teams with the conditions.
Well, I don't think anything to worry about for either team early on, but no, that was the first game for the girls. So good win for Calder to start their season off. Sandy will look to back it up against Oakley. So another tough challenge for them this week. But we moved to our second game of the week, which was Bendigo. They lost 4-6-30 to the GWS Academy, 8-7-55. And I tend to give the academies quite a hard time, but it seems in the girls' side they are pretty competitive. If you look at the ladder, they're actually GWS and Sydney's academies are first and second at the moment, which is quite funny to think, considering they will not be seen another second in this competition after a while. So good on them at least for having a good academy. But that says something about whatever they're doing in New South Wales is obviously working. But this was a game we weren't able to watch. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get through to Whitney, the girls' coach for Bendigo. There'll be some games where we aren't able to watch or aren't able to get through to a coach, which means we are relying on their stats. But we have watched Bendigo this season, so we do have a great idea of their talent. But Lucia Painter, Jamaica Douglas, Lila Keck, all standouts for Bendigo again, and they're playing really consistent football that I think is hard to see dropping off anytime soon. And I'll go through some of their stats. Lucia Painter, 26 disposals, 10 tackles. Jamaica Douglas, 22 disposals, 12 tackles. And Lila Keck, 20 disposals. So it wasn't as good a day for Bendigo, but they'll definitely look to bounce back. They've showed very good glimpses so far, and there's some great talent running through their team. But we'll move to the next game. Another game, unfortunately, we weren't able to watch was Murray 5-1-31, defeated by the Northern Knights 10-11-71. It was actually 2 wins out of 2 for Northern in that doubleheader. But, Jonty, tell me a bit more about who played well in this one.
Yeah, well, like I say, we didn't see the game, but from all reports or everything you are hearing from people who were there, it was Lulu Beattie who was the standout, and obviously some news earlier in the week with her getting drafted. So congratulations to her. She's now with Carlton on an AFLW list. So a really good story there because she's been injured, and that's prohibited her from getting a full run at a Talent League season. She came back to Northern as a 19-year-old this season, co-captaining them, and just really good. Can go through the midfield, can play in defence. When I've seen her, she's played in defence and provides really good rebound and can intercept. Her ball use is really impressive. Out back there, setting them up as well. But yeah, I suppose some other players, looking at the stats sheet, Lauren Jatzak, who's the ruck for Northern, played well, as did Winnie Buckley, who's a clean midfielder, and Paige Duffy, the standout for Murray. But move on to Geelong and Oakley, another game that neither of us were able to watch. Maggie Marnie for Oakley, and they look like they're going to be a strong outfit. They got the job done 11-6-72 to 2-2-14 over Geelong. Maggie Marnie, the standout there in a big win for Oakley, but it was their big guns that stood out in a game that was a convincing win. Sienna Tallaridi, who I know the Oakley coaching staff are quite high on as well, and Lara Horsiger, all of them massed up plenty of the footy. For Geelong, a captain's fight from Chloe Adams wasn't enough, 31 disposals and 17 tackles from her. So good to see her continuing on a really strong start to the season. Tassie versus Western, what I've heard about this match is that it was a really good opportunity for Tassie actually to showcase their 3 twin forwards that they've talked about a lot in pre-season, with Grace White, Georgia Clark and Bella Parker playing their first game this season in tandem. So although Bella Parker probably didn't have the impact she would have liked on her first match back from injury, she was still up there in the forward line and played a role. Georgia Clark hit three goals, 2 and got 11 marks, so really important inside 50. And Grace White was strong throughout the day. If you look at the other end of the ground for Tassie, in what was, by the way, a win for Tassie, 8-5-53 to 5-7-37 over Western. If you look at the other end of the ground, their fullback, Ali Poke, was quite good. Didn't get a lot of the footy, but certainly won her position and prohibited scoring of Tassie several times throughout the day. Tanisha Kakowak, another one that impressed. And Mackenzie Banks was given the job on Christy Lee Weston Turner, who's seen as a first-round draft prospect, and limited her influence, ensured that getting her disposals weren't in dangerous areas. From a Western perspective, Sierra Greaves was a standout, but it was a disappointing start to the season for a Western outfit who is expected to bounce back and be pretty strong this season.
Well, the one comment that I always think of with Tassie is when Jodie said, as a pre-season quote, she said that we're making finals straight off the bat before a game had even been played. And
an interesting one.
It's an interesting one, but I've played two
games.
Two games, and they're 2 from 2. So a strong start for Tassie. So it's looking good so far, but obviously it's a longer season now, so a lot of things can change. And if we were talking about this last year, we would probably say Tassie have 1 foot in finals. That's how short the season was. But bit of a different story now. But the last 2 games of the round, John, to you were out. This was a double header at Kilsyth. It was the repeat of the practice match we saw about 3 weeks prior, Eastern and Dandenong. I said this in my pre-season prediction. Oh, that's a pre-season. In my tips, I said Eastern would do it by even more, considering they didn't really have a full team in that practice match, and they beat Dandenong pretty convincingly, and they did it even more in this one. A pretty big statement game considering how good both these teams are. Eastern won 11-77. They beat Dandenong 4-7-31, and Eastern just took hold of that match the whole time, and you saw it firsthand. Tell me about the star-studded Eastern team. Why were they so impressive in a game that really you would think is so 50-50 going into it?
Yeah, I think they just won the midfield battle. I think that's the old coach's cliche that it's won and lost in the midfield, and they were just too good. It would be really interesting to watch that game with Meg Robertson in the Dandenong midfield. Obviously, she missed with concussion. She got concussion in the previous game and was the standout. I know, speaking to people who watched the Dandenong game last week, they said it's as good a match of female football you'll ever see. She's a prototype female footballer and will certainly attract some interest come draft time at the end of the year. But unfortunately, she missed. The players that played, from an perspective, I think Laura Stone was certainly the standout in that regard in terms of giving her team the ascendancy in the midfield. She racked up plenty of it and used it really well in there. Jess Vukic, who played a bit in the ruck, had an intriguing battle with Zoe Basenko when they went up against each other. But she helped her team get first juice when she was winning her hitouts and took some really clean marks as well. But they were just able to lock it inside 50 for extended periods, Easton. Like it's a 46-point win. It could quite easily have been a 70 or 80-point win the way it was played. I think back to the second quarter where Dandenong and Eastern effectively broke even. I think they kicked one goal each, but the ball would have been in Eastern's forward half for 80% plus of time. So a lot of credit does need to go ultimately to Dandenong's defence for holding up. Eleanor Butler and Felicity Crank really impressed me. Both of them might not necessarily have won their positions convincingly, but they still showed fight throughout the day. And took some really important intercept marks. I think also Michaela Williamson dropping back and applied some really good pressure in defence. But but the storyline that I probably haven't touched on and should have brought up earlier is Alicia Pisano. We know how big a name she is in AFLW draft sort of circles and talent pathway. She's really highly touted, came back for her first match from an ACL injury and kicked 4 goals. Could have been 6 or 7. She had a couple of balls that were sort of rushed through on the line, but really impressive performance from her and looked really dangerous as well. So you often think that it takes a bit of time for players of coming off such a long injury to have to work back into it and get up with the speed of the game. Not for her. She was on from the first bounce of the footy or the first siren. So I think overall they were the main performers. Talia Sanger on a wing maybe also deserves a shout out. She ran hard all day for the Rays.
So it was a big statement with Feast, and it will be hard to see them getting beaten too often this year. But like we said, it's early days, so you never know. But the last game for the girls, also the second game of that double header, was Gippsland, who lost 1-4-10 to GWV 9-6-60. It was a tough day for Gippsland. They're having a tough start. We've spoken about, the range of clubs they can choose from. They are probably one of the most impacted clubs in the league. Tell me, let's start with Gippsland, who performed well for them, but then we'll, move to GWV. You talk about the Millie Lades, Molly Waltons, Isabella Davies. Tell me how they performed and who else played well in that game.
Yeah, I said from a Dandenong perspective that Eleanor Butler and Felicity Crank deserve a lot of credit for holding up. Well, Sienna Lane probably even more so from a Gippsland perspective. They've had to repel probably over 100 inside 50s. I don't say that looking at stats, but with having watched them in the first 2 rounds, Gippsland have had the ball in their defensive for the majority of the time. And she just stands up. She reads the ball really well and has the ability to intercept and then also use it well coming out, which is probably where Gippsland can fall off a little bit. But her ability one-on-one has been really impressive across the first 2 rounds. Alicia Molesworth moved well through traffic. Amber Shute provided a bit of rebound as well. And Elise Molesworth, coming back from injury, showed some promising signs. Hopefully they can all get some synergy going forward and become a bit more competitive for the betterment of themselves, no doubt, but also the competition. From a GWV perspective, Millie Lane probably the standout. She provided a lot of drive from defence. She's able to take a good intercept mark. She's able to use it really well and set up some attacking chains. And the fact that we're talking about a defender as probably being the best on ground for GWV shows there was probably some positives there for Gippsland. They were able to get it up the ground. It wasn't all locked in defensive 50. Not that I'm suggesting that Millie didn't get up the ground when she had the opportunity to. But also Molly Walton moves well and is able to slip tackles really impressively. So they were the 2 for GWV, I suppose, alongside Lily Jordan, who was able to finish their work with 4 really impressive goals.
So now looking at the ladder, GWV are on top, technically on top with when you take out their two academy teams. So GWV are on top, Tassie sitting in second. So, we spoke with Tassie, big expectations, and they're definitely backing up early. A lot of teams on a single win, but obviously a lot of these Metro teams only played one game. So I'm not going to go through it all individually, but it's very tight, as you can imagine, at this stage of the season. But since saying that, let's get now to our round 4 tips for the girls. And we're starting off on Thursday night with a really big clash between GWV and Geelong. Two teams who have been really competitive. Geelong had a tough week, but they showed in that first round they are very competitive. They will be able to take it up to anyone. I'm going to back GWV. I keep backing them in, so I will say GWV will get it done by 20 points.
I just realised, didn't GWV and Geelong play in round 1? In fact, they did, because I was there and I spoke to both the coaches. So that's an interesting one.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah. Geelong got it done that day, but yeah, I'd preference GWV in that one by a couple of goals. I'm really high on what they've got. They've only got 2 in Vic Country, but I think they've got plenty more who are pushing. So GWV by 2 goals.
There you go. The replay of that game. That might be the quickest 2 games 2 teams could play against each other in that amount of time. Next game, Gippsland and Dandenong. It's tough with Gippsland. They're having a difficult start, and it's tough to play a Dandenong team who got a pretty good beating on the weekend. So I have to say Dandenong for this one.
Yeah, Dandenong will rebound from that. Dandenong by 6 goals.
The next game of the round, Calder and Murray. Calder got their season off to a good start. It's been a tough couple of weeks for Murray. I think Calder at home are pretty hard to beat, so I'm going to go with Calder.
Yeah, Calder by 4 goals.
The next game of the round, Northern and Eastern. Again, it will be a pretty competitive match. We saw Northern beat Murray by 40 points, and Eastern obviously got off to a great start. I think Eastern will just be so hard to beat. It's just really hard to look past Eastern, so I'm going to say Eastern by 15 points.
Yeah, it's amazing watching Eastern, how much they just look a level above. And I had Dandenong coming as runners-up, so yeah, I've got Eastern winning everything at this stage, Eastern by 6 goals.
And then the local rivalry, Sandy and Oakley. These are all Good Friday games, by the way, these last 4. Sandy and Oakley at RSCA Park. That will be a very good game. They're always very good games when these 2 teams play. Oakley just got off to a really strong start. I think Sandy will definitely bring it to them. I think I'm going to tip the upset and go with Sandy in this one.
I'd say Oakley and those AFLW Academy / Vic Metro players to shine. Oakley by 3 goals.
And then the last game of the round, Bendigo and Tasmania. Jonty will be at this one. We'll get to see it firsthand.
Yes, we will.
Tough one to pick.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see Tassie outside of Tassie, how they'll go. But it's sort of a road trip for both teams. But I will back the Vic team and say Bendigo will get it done.
And I'll say Tassie by 5 goals, and their 3 tall forwards to kick 6 goals between them. Tassie's 3 tall forwards.
Well, that is our tips for the girls for the next round. Yeah. We'll move now to the boys. They played round 2. So again, we're sort of, we're seeing more of the boys now. First game of the round, GWV. There were 2 very good comebacks, which we'll speak on both of these. And the first of these comebacks was GWV, who won 9-12-66, and they beat the Swans 9-8-62. And I didn't get to watch this, but at times I was turning the game on just to see where it was at. And I think it must have been, I'd say it was about the 9th minute of the 4th quarter, and the Swans were up by about 20 points.
Yeah,
wow. You're thinking, okay, game over. Probably hard to see Rebels coming back, and they kicked, I think, 4 goals in the last 10 minutes. So, and very good win.
George Stevens racked up plenty of the footy, I hear.
He had 32 touches. A great game for him, because last week wasn't as impressive. I mean, he got his hands on the footy, but you could tell he's still coming into it a bit. But I think that was this game. This was the game he really needed. It was quite a balanced effort from most of the Rebels players. Wasn't too many standouts from what David was telling me he loved what Lamont Lual was providing, just terrific down back, and he's been the constant standout at the moment, and it's hard, he'll just keep rising and rising. He's been fantastic. Lockie Charleston was around the footy, definitely impacted in the game late, moved into the half-forward line to provide a bit of a spark. Sam Lawler as well, inside mid as well, and he got shifted into the half-forward line. So I think it was a very good, it was very well tactically coached from the Rebels on the weekend. I think that's really what got them over the line. Players stood up when they needed to move around, and those were the players that stood out on that day. So it was a terrific win for the Rebels, because it's, especially the talent league sides don't want to drop many games to the academies, especially when you get, because usually, as I always say, the academies aren't very good, but they've been pretty decent this year, so we'll give it to them. So that was the first game of the round. Jonty, this was the second game of that triple header at Craigieburn, which was the repeat of the girls' game. For the boys, Calder, a really close game in the end, and from what I saw, I watched about half of that game. Sandy seemed on top for most of it. Calder lost 10-9-69 to Sandy's 11-9-75, so only 6 points in it. Give me a full rundown of that one. Two teams we really wanted to see play each other. An interesting game, but tell me a bit more about what you saw.
Yeah, what I saw was Sandy on top for 3 quarters and then called a mounted charge in the last quarter. And really, you sort of thought, where was that for the first 3 quarters, I suppose? And if they could have produced that for a longer period, it would have been a much better contest. Not to say there weren't some positives for Calder, because there certainly were. From a Sandy perspective, I really liked I say it every week, I really like the game of Harvey Johnston. That's just going to become the rinse and repeat statement, I think. Just his ability to get through traffic and his vision and execution was really good on a difficult day. But Miles Enders was the player that stood up for me, and he's one that's impressed me, done some things against Oakley in the Pracky match about 3 weeks ago. Then last week did really well in the first half of Sandy's first match against Eastern, when they were probably lacking a little bit up forward. And this week was his week to really win it for them off his own boot in the last quarter. So he kicked their last 2 goals, and without him kicking them, clearly mathematically they lose, but they were just such important steadiers. Like, I think one of them certainly had the feeling of a match winner. He took a Mark 40 out on the boundary, went back and owned the moment and kicked the goal. So he provides lots of presence and a good aerial ability up forward. And there's certainly clubs who are, or AFL wise, there's clubs that are inquiring about him. And I expect he'll push Vic Metro come King's birthday trial games. So he was the big standout for me. And Charlie Harrop also kicked 4 goals, made the most of his opportunities, and is good leading up as well. Will Brown was good in the midfield. And then from a Calder perspective, I mentioned that fight back which came in the last quarter. I think Hugo Garcia was a big part of that. He's really strong through the core, does everything right off the field from what I hear, and that really helps him. So I suppose there's 2 ways you can look at a game like that. You can say, where was that for the first 3 quarters? Or you can say, that's a nice glimpse. Let's put a star next to his name and watch what he can do next week. And yeah, it was just a nice sort of 10-15 minute period for him in the forward half to show that he has got a bit of ability. So he's a top ager, so hopefully he does show improvement. Amin Name kicked 3 goals too and was really good up forward. I like what he provides. He's still got areas of his game that need rounding out, but he's certainly got potential. And Nash King was probably the one throughout the day who was most impressive. He's the sort of player that's really skillful and moves really well. So he racked up quite a bit of the footy. He's got a lot of upsides. So he's still a bottom major. Look for him to push through the midfield for Calder both this season and next. If he gets an uninterrupted run at it, he's one who I'm really excited to watch from Calder, particularly after the weekend. Not necessarily prior to that, he wasn't on my radar as much, but he certainly has put himself there after his performance on Saturday.
And then we moved to the next game, which we didn't get to see too much of. Bendigo, I mean, not that there was a lot to see from the scoreline, but Bendigo convincingly beat GWS 19-10-124 to the Giants 6-6-42. John, just tell me a bit from the stats side. There really isn't too much to analyse with this game. When teams win by that much, everyone's usually playing well in order to get that scoreline. So tell me from the stats side, they play well.
Yeah, Tom Evans and Toby Travalia were, I suppose, the 2 standouts from what I've sort of heard around the traps. Toby Travalia we've spoken about before, what he sort of provides. So let's see if he can sort of push himself into Vic Country as a bottom major. and good to see Tom Evans. He's sort of been spoken about mildly internally, so hopefully he can use that as a base and really back that up. Geelong and Oakley, I know you watched this one and have spoken to some people about this game. There were some really clear standouts in this one. Geelong winning 13-7-85 to Oakley's 6-10-46. Do you want to tell me about who they were for Geelong? They've had a forward who's kicked 8 goals across the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, it was a great game to watch. Just haven't seen Geelong yet this season, so it was good to see them play. And it was a really interesting game because I caught the first half, and then I was watching a game in the second half, a game after that.
Yeah.
In the first half, it was really tight. It was I think it was only 3 points at half time, and then Geelong just turned it on in the second half. But that player you do speak of, Tom. Now, the last name I've heard about 3 or 4 different variations of it.
Right.
And look, I'm going to back myself here because I feel like I'm pretty decent with last names. Anastasopoulos. That is how I think you say it based off what you were looking at phonetically. That's what I think it is. Terrific game. 5 goals. He had 3 the week before. He's just, he's impressed their coach, Paul Corrigan. But it was just his running. He just got up and down the ground without, I didn't even notice he kicked that many till I saw the stat sheet. He's just one of those players who will simply do what he needs to do, make such a good impact, but you don't know, he's just doing it. It's natural for everyone in that team to know he's going to be around the ball. Really, really impressive. And I just loved his craftiness on the offensive side as well. Just knew how to get around the contest when it was tight. And it was quite awful conditions. And I'm basing that off the microphone on that stream was getting blasted. So it seemed like it was pretty poor conditions, but no, it was quite low scoring for the start when I watched. So when the ball was sort of moving back and forth, not really gaining much momentum because of that wind, he was there and provided some great offensive spark. The others I'd like to talk about, I'll actually talk about 2 defenders that Paul brought up that played really well. Angus Hastie and Ethan Boris were just really good with Geelong's transition in the end. And Angus, his endurance is really good. Just a great athletic profile, knows how to intercept the play really well and knows how to manage his position in that defensive 50. Ethan Boris, a lot more defensive orientated, whereas Angus is a bit more offensive based and likes to work up the ground. So Ethan's got that defensive side to his game and can play well on a variety of opposition. So he's not just based to, a specific opposition type. Really good decision making with the ball and just knows how to shut down forwards consistently and give them a hard time. And then one we've heard quite a lot about the first couple of rounds, Xavier Ivasic, a bottom major, a really, really elite runner, half forward that can be pushed into the midfield as well. So multi-positional, and he's got some really good composure, doesn't panic under pressure. So he's one I think we're going to keep a good tab on because he has been talked about quite a lot to start the season. And Zach McGuinness kicked 2 goals for the Falcons on the weekend. One that really impressed me, that typical tall forward role we're seeing that knows how to lead well and take a strong grab, even under a bit of defensive pressure. He just launches really well. He's a hard forward to beat. Really liked his game. And Paul was just really happy the fact he takes pressure off some of the other forwards. Michael Rubb we've heard of. He's good at just balancing his game to help take the load off some other Falcons players. That was a lot on the Falcons boys, but we did not get to talk about it much last week, so that's why a bit more of a spiel on them this week. Oakley, it wasn't as impressive as a day. I think a lot of the boys found it quite hard to get into the rhythm. Jagger Smith, as you would imagine, he played well again. Just bouncing off the contest really well, and he was using the ball probably the best on the day, being able to get it around when they were probably struggling a lot more with their transition. Tom Gross was really good along the wing, just had a really bullish nature that I think the Chargers needed at times to move forward. They just seemed a bit hesitant with their ball movement. Didn't feel like it was moving forward as well. But it was hard. There was not as many standouts with the Chargers.
Billy Hicks, did he go okay?
Billy Hicks, he did go well, really well off the half-back line and knew how to move. He was another one that when the transition was struggling, he was helping to move it forward, getting the ball to the outside a lot.
They played him off half back. That's really interesting because when I've heard about him, they speak about him as a forward and that power forward, that Jake Stringer type. So it's interesting there.
Moved like up, sort of moved up the win at times. I say half back purely because I feel like when I was watching that, they were playing a very defensive game because Geelong were quite offensive. So maybe it felt like that, but he was definitely on the defensive side more than anything on the weekend.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel on that game. Apologies for making that go for a while, but we'll now move to Dandenong and Brisbane. This was the last game of your triple header at Kageburn.
Yeah.
It was a interesting one from what I watched, and you obviously saw firsthand. Dandenong got over the line 10-15-75, beat Brisbane 8-9-57. We saw Brisbane last week were competitive enough against Oakley, but we expected Dandenong to come in and win this game. Give me your rundown from the Dandenong side. They obviously had to bounce back, so who did bounce back well?
Yeah, I think just firstly, you think of a Collingwood Richmond Friday night, or if you're a VFL fan, a Frankston Williamstown match, and he's being really inaccurate. And Dandenong and Brisbane was probably the game on the weekend from a talent league perspective that was like that, in that Dandenong just kept Brisbane in it with their inaccuracy. It was scores were level at half time, and Dandenong would have had the majority of inside 50s and the majority of the scoring shots, but just weren't able to convert. So that was unfortunate, but it kept it closer for longer, which allowed players to stand up when the game was on the line and that sort of thing. But Harry DiMattia is the one I want to talk about. Obviously, co-captain of Dandenong last week, stepped into a midfield forward role when Cooper Simpson was a relatively laid out. He was put on ice with a minor sort of injury, but or a corky, sorry. But he played well, got 15 disposals and kicked 3 goals. And then this week, based off last week's performance, he was clearly Dandenong's best on ground. He remains in the midfield rotation and, again, showed some really positive signs, showed his cleanliness and showed, he's a really big body. So he's one who I really like watching in the midfield. So hopefully he does stay there throughout the season. When he went forward, I suppose the one thing he might be disappointed with is instead of kicking 3 goals or similar again, he would have kicked 1 goal 3 because he did miss a few. But you take out that finishing polish, and it was another really impressive performance from Harry DiMattia. So that was good, and he was playing in tandem with his fellow co-captain, Cooper Simpson, for the first time this year. Cooper Simpson, I think I've been really high on throughout pre-season and last year, and he had a solid return without being spectacular. Sam Frangala's got a bit of it and was important in winning that midfield battle. And Billy Wilson also impressed me behind the ball. He was one of a few Dandenong defenders, but probably the most pertinent, who got some intercept marks and was able to provide a bit of drive off half back, didn't let the ball get past him very much. So, Brisbane have a bit of a tall forward line, so that role was really important. And I know he's one they hope can push into Vic country. So he did his chances no harm on the weekend, Billy Wilson. So that's sort of what I'd take out of that game. Nathan, you watched the Murray and Northern boys game. Northern got up by 7 points there. That was the other one of the big comebacks that we were going to talk about. So tell me what you saw and who stood up.
Yeah, well, great comeback there. It was all day Murray pretty much had the upper hand, and it was interesting because Northern kicked, I think, the first 5 points of the game. I think it was 5-0 or 4-0 at one game. They were all goals. They were all points they probably should have converted. So they just kicked them.
That's interesting just to note. Sorry, Nathan, because we know last week they kicked 5 goals, 19 or something. So it would have been hard to get out of that epidemic of contagious misses. Yeah. So and for doing that, but go on.
And Murray really had a good hold on that game. It was, I just, watching, you're thinking, okay, well, they're probably not going to lose this just based off the way the game's going. And then out of nowhere, Northern just turned it on in the last quarter, and we were actually on a call at that point. And I just kept telling you, Northern kicked another one. It was crazy to watch and really impressive. But I'll start with Murray, my standout, Connor O'Sullivan. Especially that first quarter, he, like, every ball that was coming in was his. Taking a good contested grab. Probably had some clumsy moments as well in that first quarter where just, out of that adrenaline played on, snapped, missed, those type of forwards that do that at some point. But he kicked 2 goals in that first quarter. He didn't kick another goal for the game. he had some, moments, but that first quarter was just a really good glimpse of what he's going to provide and get better at. Kobe James was another one that was impressive for Murray throughout the middle, 2 goals, 22 disposals. Another one, Mitchell Weah, 2 goals, just really good body work, taking good contested marks inside the goal square as well.
He's played senior footy and he's one that's really impressed from what I've heard. So good to see him doing it at talent league level.
Yeah, he was great and just very good moments, and also a really good dribble goal from the sort of the pocket. A fair way out, wasn't too close. It was a great dribble goal, I think, in the third quarter. From a Northern perspective, lost my notes quickly. Ben Ham played his role really well, got through traffic really great, and just some good decision making on the day, and was just complementing the midfield when it was, working well for them, as well as when it was getting tough as well. Jesse Totoli, another bottom major, was playing his role really well. He kicked 3 goals in the last quarter, so that's where your goals were coming from. But his body movement was really well, knew how to get into the position and take those marks. I think a lot of those goals from Northern were contested marks. From memory, they were a lot of good marks to get those goals instead of just in general play. I'll quickly speak on Nate Caddy. Good first game back. Obviously, I mean, he'd had the knee injury, but he's back now. So he played okay. It was what you'd expect from someone who's coming back from an injury. He kicked 2 goals in the end. Probably could have done more. And he took an extremely good mark, which I had the volume off. And I thought he dropped it, but when I was talking to Anthony Rocker, he said it was paid. So he did take a really good leap in the last quarter. So good sign that he's back into his leaping agility very quickly. But back to some others, Jed Wallace, medium tall defender, his ability to read the play was really well, and great tackling pressure on the day. And then Christian Ferronato, Jonty, you've obviously talked a bit about him before, an inside player, another contested player that was just performing well on the day, knew how to get his hands on the ball. Probably needs to tidy up his work with his just get some cleaner hands on the ball. But when that happens and when his composure improves, he's really bursting onto the scene at the moment. So that's Murray and Northern. Apologies, I've given a lot today, probably too much than I should have. But we've got 2 more games we'll quickly get through. Time, we're just looking at a time. We don't want audience to be listening for too long. But Tassie beat the Western Jets 10-10-70 to 8-7-55. Jonty, we didn't get to watch this, but you've heard quite a lot about this game. Tell me who played well for both sides.
Yeah, Tom Beaumont was the big standout in the midfield from a Tassie perspective. He put up massive numbers, got 38 touches, and really impressed a lot of people with his ability through the midfield. Obviously, did a little bit in the last quarter as well when Tassie pulled away, but to isolate his last quarter would be unfair because he was strong throughout the whole game. From a Western Jets perspective, it's the second week in a row that they've sort of been really competitive for 3 quarters and then just fallen away right at the end, which would be disappointing for them. Luca Grego played well. From what I've heard, Jovan Petric, who's come back as a 19-year-old, kicked 4 goals, so he'd be really pleased with that display. And Logan Morris, who we know is touted as a possible first-round draft pick, kicked 2 goals as that sort of marking forward. So they were the standouts there. 10-10-70 to 8-7-55, a 15-point win for Tassie down at Dial Park. Eastern won convincingly over the Gold Coast Suns Academy 16-10-106 to 7-7-49. Christian Moraes is a player I'm high on from what I've seen of him as a midfielder forward with good skills, still slightly built, still a bottom major. He got 24 and a goal. And then Josh Smiley got 2 goals, has been the talk of the weekend with his big-bodied midfield performance against, a weaker opponent to some degree. Obviously, we see the overall statistics. Nick Watson had some moments that you expect from him, and Cam Nyko, obviously the other one from them in the AFL Academy, 25 and a goal. He's a defender, so good to see them get their first win of the season. Yeah, they did lose to Sandy, but we do think they're probably up there with the strongest in the competition. But that brings us to an end, Nathan. We've just got our tips to do.
We do. Well, I'll just touch on the Eastern game quickly. I mean, I watched that game. It's hard with those, belting games where everyone's playing well. So it's hard to give a proper analysis on those type of games. But it was, I'll back up your point. Josh Smiley is probably my standout for that game, but didn't have too much to add, to be honest. But yes, let's now get to our tips for round 3 of the boys. We are heating up more and more the more we get further in with their competition. The first game of the round on Thursday night, Murray and GWS. Murray have to bounce back, you would think, after the most disappointing loss you can have, letting a team come back from that deficit. So I'm going to back Murray.
Yeah, I'll say Murray by 3 goals.
And then the second game of the round, I would debate this as game of the round, the Rebels and the Falcons, based off the form both teams are in. I'm liking the way both these teams are playing. I reckon the Rebels would have taken a lot of confidence from that comeback win. And again, I'm going to tip an upset and say the Rebels will get it done.
Yeah, no, I'll stick with Geelong. I just think they've got too much talent, too much top end talent. So Geelong by 5 goals.
And then we move to Good Friday with Eastern and Northern. 2 teams coming off really good wins. I think Eastern's talent might be a bit too much, so I'm going to back Eastern.
Yeah, talent and depth for Eastern. So, yeah, I'll say Eastern by 5 goals.
And then we move to, I would say, the derby of the sort of bottom country, like the bottom region country teams in Gippsland and Dandenong.
Yes.
2 teams. It'll be a very competitive game. I could see this going either way. I think the week off for Gippsland actually might hurt them a little bit with Dandenong coming straight off a win. So I'm going to back Dandenong in this one.
Yeah, this is one that could go either way. I will back. I love Dandenong, but I want to back. I want to back Gippsland, but I will say Dandenong will do it, and yeah, Cooper Simpson will stand up. My boy Cooper Simpson, but will kick a couple of goals and get 25.
Another derby-ish game. I keep saying derby, but that's debatable. But Calder and Western, at least close in region. And Western have to bounce back. You don't want to lose your first game. Calder were also pretty impressive last week, but we saw a bit better of them the week before. Again, I'm probably going to say Western just off the fact they need to get their first win and you don't want to leave it too long.
Yeah, no, I'm going to say Calder. I'm really high on what they can produce this season. I don't think they're as far off the top echelon of teams as people think. So I'm going to say Calder, and yeah, I'm going to say Hugo Garcia to kick a couple of goals and put in a strong 4-quarter performance this week.
And then the local rivalry for the boys, Sandy and Oakley at RSCA. That's a 5:30 bounce, so a bit of a later one under lights for that one. I've got to go with Sandy. I think Oakley, we saw these two in the preseason and Sandy did it quite comfortably, relatively both full teams. So I'm going to back Sandy in this one.
I've been conservative with my tipping of Sandringham in the last couple of weeks, but how's this for prediction? Sandy by 12 goals. They're
12 goals.
Top of Oakley's young midfield, and I talked about Enders off the top, Miles Enders to kick 6. There's a bold prediction.
This will be an interesting predictions next week if that call does go completely wrong. But our last game of the round, Bendigo and Tasmania, will be at this one, Jonty. I'm really intrigued with this game. I think very evenly balanced teams from what we've gauged early on. And Tassie travelling for the first time this year, so it'll be interesting to see how they come over and perform at Victoria. I think Bendigo will get it done in a really close one by 10 points.
Yeah, Bendigo by 3 goals and Toby Travalia to put forward another strong performance.
Well, that wraps it up. It's a bit of a longer one from us today. We don't usually go into this territory of time, but it's a good thing. If we're getting a lot of information, we might as well put it out into the universe. So thank you, Jonty, again for joining me. We'll be back again next week. I've got a bit to chat about next week. We've got some news with the multicultural academies that we'd like to talk about. So there will be a bit more to talk about next week, and we'll see a few more games this week as well. So thank you, Jonty, for joining me. Keep up to date with everything on our social media. Craft of the Draft, if you type it up, it will come up. And until then, we will see you in the next episode.